بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الحمد لله الواحد الأحد الصمد الذي لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا مولانا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما وعملا يا رب العالمين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. وقال الله تبارك وتعالى وإذ قال ربك للملائكة إني جاعل في الأرض خليفة قالوا أتجعل فيها من يفسد فيها ويسفك الدماء ونحن نسبح بحمدك ونقدس لك. We begin with the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We acknowledge that all praise and thanks belong to Him alone. Therefore we seek His guidance, we seek His assistance, we seek His forgiveness, we seek His love and His nearness. And we put our complete trust and reliance in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. I bear witness that there is no being worthy of serving, worthy of observing, worthy of worshipping except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I bear witness that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is the last and final messenger. In our previous khutbah, we went over the importance of the stories of the Quran al-Kareem. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has dedicated a good portion of the Quran al-Kareem to narrating stories. And this is a beneficial way for us to connect to the core of the Quran al-Kareem. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses these stories in the Quran al-Kareem to drive the point home for us to derive the lessons from them. So inshallah, today we will commence our journey in going over the stories of the Quran al-Kareem, and we will be starting with none other than Sayyidina Adam alayhi salatu wassalam, the first creation and the first to be mentioned in the Quran al-Kareem. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as we know, created Adam alayhi salatu wassalam and made him to be the first from the human beings. And also in the tartib of the Quran al-Kareem, he is the first from the Anbiya alayhi salatu wassalam to be mentioned. Now when mentioning the creation of Adam alayhi salatu wassalam, there are two other creations that ought to be highlighted at this point. Number one is the creation of angels, and number two, the creation of jinns. And these are closely tied to the creation of Adam alayhi salatu wassalam. We know that the angels are created from nur, the jinns are created from fire, and human beings are created from soil. And there are distinct qualities for each of these creations based on the materials they are created with. The angels are created with nur. There is no hawa, there is no shahwa, there is no desire, there is no needs that need to be fulfilled. And thus there is no sin that emanates from them. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, لا يعصون الله ما أمرهم ويفعلون ما يؤمرون. They do not disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with regards to what He has commanded them with, وَيَفْعَلُونَ مَا يُؤْمَرُونَ, and they carry out what they have been commanded. So this is the first creation, and that is of angels who are made of nur. They have no desires, they have no shahwa. The second creation is that of jinn, and they are created from fire. And they do have shahwa, they do have desires. And this is why they are also mukallaf, they are also responsible creations. And this is why they have some who are good and some who are bad. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions about them, وَأَنَّا مِنَّا الْمُسْلِمُونَ وَمِنَّا الْقَاسِطُونَ. For amongst us there are some who are Muslims and are believers, and there are some who are qasitun, who are oppressors. The third are human beings who are created from clay. And not only do we have shahwa and desires, but also intellect. Human beings, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created last. As some of the angels, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the human beings last. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala informed the angels of the creation of the human beings, the angels, out of concern, they asked, أَتَجْعَلُ فِيهَا مَنْ يَفْسِدُ فِيهَا وَيَسْفِقُ الدِّمَاء. thinking about what the combination of aql, intellect, and desires can lead to, they said, will you create a being that will cause corruption and that will spill blood? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala relates and tells us and informs us of these three creations. Now the question comes to mind, why does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in creating these different creations, why does He create them with different materials? Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala create the human beings out of soil and clay, the jinn out of fire, and the angels out of nur? And the answer to this is that the substance, the materials with which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates the different creations is in accordance to their responsibilities. The malaika, the angels, are created from nur, and their sole responsibility is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَنَحْنُ نُسَبِّحُ بِحَمْدِكَ وَنُقَدِّسُ لَكَ. The angels, they don't لَا يَعْصُونَ اللَّهَ مَا أَمَرَهُمْ وَيَفْعَلُونَ مَا يُؤْمَرُونَ. They have to just worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, glorify Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they never disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The second category is of jinn, and we know they're created of fire. And this is something that many of them, they have makr, they have some sense of mischievousness. And this is the material that they are created with. And human beings, we are created from clay. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَاسْتَعْمَرَكُمْ فِيهَا. One of the greatest responsibilities of human beings, as we'll go over, is وَاسْتَعْمَرَكُمْ فِيهَا, is to build on this earth. And one unique thing that is highlighted from the scholars of tafsir about the creation of human beings from soil is that the type of soil that the different creations were created with, or the human beings, as we will go over Adam alayhi salatu wasalam's creation, the types of soil leads to the types and the difference and the fluctuation in the mannerisms of people. So Adam alayhi salatu wasalam is created from clay. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it such that Adam alayhi salatu wasalam, as the Quran al-Kareem highlights, was created over 7 stages and steps. So we'll go over what these 7 stages of the creation of Adam alayhi salatu wasalam were. And number 2, we'll go over what is the benefit of going over these stages. Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala utilize these different stages to create Adam alayhi salatu wasalam, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could have just commanded kun fayakun, and Adam alayhi salatu wasalam would have been there, and there's no need for stages. So number 1, the different stages of the creation of Adam alayhi salatu wasalam, as mentioned in the Quran al-Kareem. The first step, or the first stage of Adam alayhi salatu wasalam was min turab, from soil. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, إِنَّ مَثَلَ عِيسَى عِنْدَ اللَّهِ كَمَثَلِ آدَمَ خَلَقَهُ مِن تُرَابٍ. That the example of Isa alayhi salatu wasalam is just like the example of Adam alayhi salatu wasalam, who he created from soil. And we find Abu Musa al-Ash'ari radiallahu anhu, he relates from the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam the explanation of this, which is found in Tirmidhi and Abu Dawood, that إِنَّ اللَّهَ خَلَقَ آدَمَ مِنْ قَبَضَةٍ قَبَضَهَا مِنْ جَمِيعِ الْأَرْضِ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created Adam alayhi salatu wasalam with a lump of soil which was collected from the different parts of the earth. So the combinations of soil that was used to create Adam alayhi salatu wasalam was gathered from throughout the earth. Thus the difference in human behavior and complexions, they stem from this, that the original soil used for the creation of Adam alayhi salatu wasalam was sourced from different parts of the earth. So number 1, min turab. The second step of the creation of Adam alayhi salatu wasalam was min teen. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِذْ قَالَ رَبُّكَ لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ إِنِّي خَالِقٌ بَشَرٌ مِّن طِينٍ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that He created human beings from clay. So soil, the second step was clay. When the water and soil is mixed and it starts to become that clay, this is called teen. The third step, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, is teen al-lazim. Teen al-lazim. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned, فَاسْتَفْتِهِمْ أَهُمْ أَشَدُّ خَلْقًا أَمَّنْ خَلَقْنَا إِنَّا خَلَقْنَاهُمْ مِنْ طِينِ اللَّازِمِ. That we created them from teen al-lazim. Teen al-lazim is the next stage of clay, which is kneaded and is a sticky clay. So we can see the steps so far. soil, and then the start of clay, and now this clay starts to become sticky and it starts to bind together, it is kneaded together. The fourth step, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, min salsalin min hama'in masnoon. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in the Quran al-Kareem, وَإِذْ قَالَ رَبُّكَ لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ إِنِّي خَالِقٌ بَشَرًا مِنْ صَلْصَالٍ مِنْ حَمَإٍ مَسْنُونٍ. And this is the next step of the clay, where it's salsalin min hama'in masnoon. It's the sounding, or the clay, it starts to harden, it starts to dry up, and there is a sound that emanates from it. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the fifth step of the creation of Adam alayhi salatu wasalam is salsalin kal-fakhar. خَلَقَ الْإِنسَانَ مِنْ صَلْصَالٍ كَالْفَخَّارِ. And that is the sounding clay like pottery, meaning when the clay has dried up and now it has a solid shape. So these are the 5 steps before the soul of Adam alayhi salatu wasalam was placed. Step number 6 of the creation of Adam alayhi salatu wasalam, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, is his tasweer into a human form. Him being shaped into a human form. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَقَدْ خَلَقْنَاكُمْ ثُمَّ صَوَّرْنَاكُمْ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created Adam alayhi salatu wasalam, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him the shape of a human being. And the final step of the creation of Adam alayhi salatu wasalam is نفخ الروح. فَإِذَا سَوَّيْتُهُ وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِي. When he was perfected, and then the soul from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was blown into Adam alayhi salatu wasalam. Now there's a unique point that is mentioned here, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shows His kindness towards human beings by attributing the soul of Adam alayhi salatu wasalam to himself. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِي. And I blew into him from my soul. Meaning, when we say the Kitabullah, Baytullah, this is something that is attributed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the soul that was given to Adam alayhi salatu wasalam was from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So these were the 7 stages, or the 7 steps of the creation of Adam alayhi salatu wasalam. Now the question is, why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala go through these stages to create Adam alayhi salatu wasalam, where he has the ability to just say kun fayakun? The first answer, as the scholars of Tafsir give, is to appreciate the greatness and the strength of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His perfection in His creation. When we examine the different stages that initiated from soil, and it ended through such a being who has the worth or the responsibility of being the Khalifa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on earth. We see the natural progression that from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from soil, from clay, created such a being that has this intellect and that has this the wherewithal to build and to construct and to have ideas. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, إِنَّا عَرَضْنَا الْأَمَانَةَ عَلَى السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَالْجِبَالِ فَأَبَيْنَ أَن يَحْمِلْنَهَا وَأَشْفَقْنَ مِنْهَا وَحَمَلَهَا الْإِنسَانِ. Right? This is a responsibility that only human beings were able to take on. And this shows that the greatness and the strength of the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is the first answer why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created Adam alayhi salatu wasalam in stages. The second answer to why Adam alayhi salatu wasalam was created in stages is to appreciate our value in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When something is given time, when importance is given into the creation of something, it shows the value that it has. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given nobility to the children of Adam alayhi salatu wasalam. And we can appreciate this from one of the stories or the incidents that happened in the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. A funeral procession was going by Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam out of respect stood up. And this was in Medina Munawwara, and those around Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam asked him that, why are you standing up out of respect when the person is a Jewish person who is being carried? Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, is he not a human being? Right? So this shows that we can appreciate the value of human beings in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates Adam alayhi salatu wasalam, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses these 7 stages, and then Allah subhanahu subhanahu wa ta'ala announces to the malaika, the angels, and informs them of the creation of Adam alayhi salatu wasalam. وَإِذْ قَالَ رَبُّكَ لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً. Now there's two opinions as to when this announcement was made. Was it before the creation of Adam alayhi salatu wasalam or after the completion? And many of the scholars of Tafsir are of the opinion that it took place after the creation of Adam alayhi salatu wasalam. This is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala announced to the malaika. Now the question is, why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala announce it to the malaika? When an announcement is made in this world, there is a need behind why a person is announcing something. When a person is developing something, and they announce that this will come into the market soon, there's a need, they need a customer base for that. They need to build up some type of interest for it. When a person announces his accomplishment, they want some type of acknowledgement. And this is not needed in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala announce to the malaika the creation of Adam alayhi salatu wasalam? The first reason that is given why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala announced to the malaika is tashrifa li Adam alayhi salatu wasalam. Out of respect for Adam alayhi salatu wasalam, to inform the malaika that this new creation, Adam alayhi salatu wasalam, is a creation that is mukarram in Allah, that has nobility in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Number two is tashrifan lahum, is respect towards the angels. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, we can say in our terminology, out of courtesy to the malaika, telling them that another creation is coming who has intellect as well. The third answer that is given why the malaika were informed is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is teaching us that when you are working on something, when there is a teaching lesson for us, is that to announce something that you are working on. When there is an achievement, there's something that's happening, announce it. And the final answer that is given is the angels did not know the maqam of Adam alayhi salatu wasalam. And by announcing to the malaika who Adam alayhi salatu wasalam is and what his position, great value is, the angels can now appreciate this creation of Adam alayhi salatu wasalam. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates Adam alayhi salatu wasalam over these seven steps from soil until the soul is brought in. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala announces to the malaika and he tells them, Inni ja'ilun fil ardi khalifa. I have made Adam alayhi salatu wasalam, and by extension the human beings, khalifa on earth. Now khalifa, we know the translation, it means deputy, it means successor. But what does it mean that Adam alayhi salatu wasalam is the khalifa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on earth? What is the benefit of it? Why is Adam alayhi salatu wasalam called a khalifa? There are a number of answers that the scholars of the sin give. Number one is that Adam alayhi salatu wasalam, or human beings at large, succeeded or came after the creation before them. Before the creation of human beings, there was the universe of angels and jinn. The second answer that is given is that human beings will have generation after generation which will succeed one another. And the third and final answer that is given is that يَخْلُقُ اللَّهَ فِي أَمْرَيْنِ. They are the deputy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on earth with regards to two things. Number one is فِي الْحُكْمِ وَالْعَدْلِ وَالْعِلْمِ. When it comes to bringing justice and it comes to upholding justice. And number two was وَاسْتَعْمَرَكُمْ فِيهَا, to build. The first one was to implement justice. Why the human beings are the Khalifa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on earth? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the story of Dawood alayhi salatu wasalam, Ya Dawood, inna ja'alnaka khalifatan fil ard, yahkumu bayna an-nasi bil haqq, wa la tattabi' al-hawa. That this word Khalifa in this context of Dawood alayhi salatu wasalam is used, that you are the Khalifa of Allah on earth to uphold the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is why when we relay commands, etc., we say this is the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the hukam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is the first responsibility of why human beings are considered the Khalifa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on earth. The second answer was نَسْتَعْمَرَكُمْ فِيهَا, right? And this is the most often used case that the human beings have to build on this earth. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-A'raf mentions إذ جعلكم خلفاء من بعد عدم وبوأكم في الأرض تتخذون من سهولها قصورا وتنحتون الجبال بيوتا. And remember when we made you khulafa after the time of Ma'ad, وبوأكم في الأرض, and you were used to build on this land. تتخذون من سهولها قصورا, on the plains you created palaces. وتتخذون الجبال بيوتا, and you made homes into mountains. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates Adam alayhi salatu wasalam, informs the malaika that there will be human beings who will be Khalifa. Now the angels had this concern after hearing this. قالوا أتجعل فيها من يفسد فيها ويسفك الدماء. The angels, they had the example of jinn who also had hawa and they had shahwa. And they had their corruption and they had the different misdeeds that they did. So the angels said that, are you going to create a creation who will go about doing such wrong? وَنَحْنُ نُسَبِّحُ بِحَمْدِكَ وَنُقَدِّسُ لَكَ, and we praise you and we make your tasbih and we glorify you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He shows the quality of Adam alayhi salatu wasalam. The Khalifa, the successor, needs to, along with worship that the angels do, needs to have knowledge. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءِ. One of the unique traits of human beings and Adam alayhi salatu wasalam was that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught him the names of everything. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed Adam alayhi salatu wasalam with intellect. When a person, people are known for their greatest quality. Angels are known for their tasbih, and Adam alayhi salatu wasalam was known for his knowledge and ilm. Inshallah, we'll continue the story of Adam alayhi salatu wasalam in the next khutbah. But one lesson that we can take from this part of the story of Adam alayhi salatu wasalam is that the respect that Adam alayhi salatu wasalam was given was because of the knowledge that he was blessed with. And as human beings who are the children of Adam alayhi salatu wasalam, we should appreciate this faculty that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed us with. And this is something that we need to continuously build on. That we need to be from amongst those who continue to study and continue to acquire knowledge of this world and religious knowledge as well. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for tawfiq and understanding, and may He make us from amongst those who understand the Quran and are closer to the Quran al-Kareem. Wa akhir da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.